Hey guys, remember when NewJeans Mama said it wasn't about the money at all? Her battle with HYBE was to protect her precious NewJeans members from the evils of this big HYBE corporation. Well, it turns out, you know how she said that like 5 minutes ago, that 5 minutes that turned into a whole year? The biggest battle, the biggest fight going on in the courts involving NewJeans Mama is entirely about money. It's been about money from the beginning. NewJeans Mama is hungry.
It's a really greedy game. If your hungry hippo gobbles up the most marbles, then you're the champion chomper. Hungry hippos, they're always hungry for fun.
And she wants her meal ticket back. Now, I don't know what kind of school lunch program they have over at the Jezebel Institute of Treachery, but NewJeans Mama is floating around off campus to try to get a Big Mac, but it looks like they're going to be charging her for that cup of water. The biggest irony that never was out of all of this is that the NewJeans members, the 5 girls, are essentially protecting and shielding NewJeans Mama from the brunt of the recent public relations war. NewJeans is the face of the suffering people, and then NewJeans Mama has quietly just settled herself in the fold. And now she has been forced to come out with a statement. She's been quiet for a while. Maybe them billable hours, racked up too much over at the law firm and then also at the marketing agency that is like, you go in one door, it's the lawyers. The other door, it's her viral marketing agency. Both very expensive, top of the line people and teams. But she did make a statement through her lawyers, and essentially she is really battling for her life. She's basically battling for her stock options, which already look like it is a done deal loss. But her lawyers, in order to get paid, and probably that marketing firm as well, really need to win this lawsuit in order for her to get money. And essentially that would be HYBE giving her money, HYBE paying her legal bills for the attack that she made on HYBE. So there are 2 lawsuits going on right now at the same time that essentially cover the same issue. One lawsuit was brought by HYBE and the other lawsuit was brought upon by Jin. The court says that they're going to merge these 2 lawsuits and have parallel hearings for the different aspects, but essentially it boils down to whether Jin can get her payout of the stock options for ADOR. Remember, she has the 13.5% ownership in ADOR. And actually that hasn't changed, right? Because that is essentially just a piece of property that she has. The issue that she's trying to push is that part of her employment agreement allowed this sweetener, this real big incentive, saying that whenever she wanted to cash out, she would be able to force HYBE to be the buyer of the shares. So let's say like nobody wanted to buy these shares or nobody wanted to buy it at a high price. She had worked out in advance, or she was working, when all this came out, she was working on revising her agreement to even get more money. And that also raised the red flags, remember, about a year ago. And so in that case, HYBE would pay a multiple of the average profits for the past 2 years. So essentially, you get a guaranteed buyer. She wants to cash out, then she would be able to cash out at a very attractive price for her, and HYBE would be the ones who would be the buyers. She would still, and she still does, own 13.5% of ADOR, but it's a point of like, who wants to buy that crap, and at what price? And so she wants to force HYBE to honor her original agreement of getting a lot of money for her 13.5%. Now, HYBE is saying that, okay, we're going to court to just confirm that her employment contract that we canceled as CEO is valid, and therefore the shareholder agreement also has been terminated. They seem to be attacking it from different angles. On the one hand, the shareholder agreement itself, that put option agreement that she gets those stock options and is able to sell it to HYBE, that can just get canceled for her running all of her schemes and breaching her duty, breaching trust. NewJeans says that, oh no, you can't do all of this just because we are breaching trust. You have to honor my stock options, and that is why I am going to court. Now, the total amount of money that we're talking about always ranged in such wild fluctuations because it really depended on the average profit of the previous 2 years. And it looked like in the original plan, actually, it didn't look like, we saw the original plan, that she was going to cash out her stock options at the beginning of this year, January 2025, and that would allow her to get 2 profitable years in the books, 2024 and 2023, and based on that juicy number, have her stock options valued at a higher rate. 2022 was a year of losses, and she exercised. It looked like she had to just bite the bullet and try to get it in as fast as possible because she was probably anticipating that there's a problem here, that her entire stock option situation could just be canceled like that, which it essentially is. And so she registered this in November 2024 to exercise the stock options. And remember we discussed, we're like, why is she doing it so early? She could have just waited essentially 8 weeks and get a lot more money. But we're looking at about $20 million, about 26 billion Korean won. And so last week was the hearing that went over some of the details. And whenever there's a hearing, we have the documents that were submitted to the court by each side, and from that, what has been released to the public, we can glean what is going on, what arguments they are making. Now, HYBE's position is that since the contract termination is complete, the put option cannot be exercised. However, NewJeans' side said that the put option was already exercised before the contract termination, which sort of doesn't make sense because if her put option was exercised before the contract termination, that was in November. Now, she's probably fudging. She's totally fudging the details of when this contract termination was. In August, the board of ADOR voted to remove her from the CEO position, but keep her on as a member of the board of directors and, more importantly, as the main producer for NewJeans until the rest of NewJeans' contract. NewJeans had decided to quit in about November, around that area. And so I think that's why she is trying to say that, oh, I asked for my stock options before I left. However, she wasn't able to exercise those stock options after being demoted from CEO. And not only that, what she did while she was CEO would have just violated the contract anyway, and that is what HYBE is arguing in court. HYBE says that the shareholder agreement was a contract between HYBE and former CEO NewJeans, but it has already been terminated, and the dismissal of former CEO NewJeans was a decision made independently by the ADOR board of directors based on management judgment and is not related to the HYBE or the shareholder agreement. So now it's coming back to bite her. Remember back when she first won that injunction early on, and she's saying there's a difference, I'm sorry, between ADOR and HYBE legally. And so the shocking part of that ruling that people were just like, okay, all right, we know what the game board is now. Okay, that was really weird, but we get it. That for her to do all of her treacherous actions for ADOR is not a violation of her duties as a CEO to ADOR, even though the judge said, wow, she really betrayed HYBE. So they made a distinction there. Now it's coming back to bite her, saying that, like, okay, well, you violated this agreement with HYBE. And so, you know what? Even if you were removed as CEO, it doesn't really matter too much, because those are separate issues. So Minijin is just trying to spin all sorts of distractions in her legal argument. First of all, saying that, like, oh, HYBE is being late on their homework, or they're turning in their documents late. I've been looking at this, and actually both of them have been doing a good job, like submitting some documents back and forth, instead of just everybody waiting until the day before to submit their documents, because it looks like people want to get this over with. But just the normal things that people do in court, Minijin is trying to paint HYBE as a bad person or a bad entity on this, even though she is not submitting her documents or homework. She's making it more difficult, essentially, for the back and forth to happen, so that there can be a closer movement, or movement closer to a resolution. And on a related note, she's saying that the burden of proof lies upon HYBE to provide the valid grounds for termination, as if we don't already all know and can make our own PowerPoint why the termination was completely valid. HYBE is saying that, well, in order for us to release more of this evidentiary documentation, we need to have your point of view so that we can rebut it. But she's saying, like, I don't gotta rebut nothing. You gotta come up with all of the receipts in the document. So it seems like there's some sort of legal game here where HYBE wants to me, it looks like they're trying to keep the cards close to their vest, and they only want to respond to what Minijin is saying, so that whatever they present in court cannot be used against them back. And that definitely does happen. You know, if you're too open with all of your information because the judge is saying, like, oh, they want it that way, yeah, don't trust them. You gotta be very careful about what you use as evidence, so that that doesn't backfire upon yourself. So it looks like both of them playing this game because they know that they're dealing with a top graduate from the Jezebel Institute of Treachery, and treachery she does bring into them courtrooms. The next joint trial is set for June 12th, so there's gonna be a lot of back and forth. Hopefully, if both of them are just gonna be like delay, then they're not going to be doing a lot of back and forth, and especially if Minijin is going to be, yet again, trying to have a different court session in the court of public opinion. But nevertheless, ADOR has continued to fulfill its financial obligations to NewJeans. So we're seeing, like, how this fight is being played differently for NewJeans, where they're trying to say this contract is valid, even though NewJeans is saying, oh, breach of trust, the trust has been broken and therefore we're allowed to leave our exclusive contract. Minijin is saying that, well, even if there is breach of trust in my situation, you can't cancel my shareholder agreement, you can't cancel my stock options, I gotta be able to keep that money train coming in and not have my ticket canceled over a breach of trust issue. So she's trying to play it both ways, and it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So through her law firm, Minijin said that HYBE stated they can only submit specific evidentiary documents if Minijin's side rebuts their claims. But this contradicts the principles of burden of proof distribution in civil litigation. We hope HYBE acknowledges that they bear the burden of proof regardless of whether Minijin's side provides a rebuttal. You know what's been the burden of proof that has been burdening us for the past year is your laptop, honey. That is a big burden of proof, and it's probably burdening itself at the bottom of the Han River and now become a little bit of like a condo for some mitochondria that lives at the bottom of the river. But Min Hee-jin, where is your laptop? HYBE is saying, well, the breakdown of trust is the issue, not the termination of the shareholder agreement. So Min Hee-jin is trying to spin this as like, you terminated this shareholder agreement unfairly, and you have to prove that it's fair, HYBE. And HYBE is saying like, look, that is one thing, but the main issue is the breakdown of trust. So HYBE is trying to refocus it on what really matters in court, is that if there is demonstrated breach of trust, then essentially the shareholder agreement is terminated. So she's just like kind of arguing this backwards. Essentially, she's trying to say, HYBE, you prove it. And HYBE's saying like, yeah, we are proving it because of the breakdown of trust, which is essentially the same thing, but she's trying to, I think, nab them on some weird technicality and distract the judges by moving it to a different legal argument that maybe she can win. And you know, with the JIT ways, if you just like keep hacking and hacking and hacking and you try to move your opponent away from their foundation of strength, yeah, you can JIT win this, but I don't think that HYBE is ever going to fall for that. Now, let's clarify this issue of being quote unquote guaranteed a CEO position for Min Hee-jin. Now, that has already been legally debunked. It was promised, yes. So this is why it was kind of complicated, but it had already been worked its way through all of the legal experts, legal professors, and past precedent. But essentially, it was offered to her that HYBE said that, look, yes, we want you to always be the CEO of ADOR. And this is when things were going great between her and Park Ji-hyuk. And Park Ji-hyuk is saying like, yeah, of course, we're creating this new label for you. It makes sense that, you know, you are always going to be the CEO of this. So yeah, we're going to always let you be the CEO. However, even though that was offered, apparently just like law land, that worked out in HYBE's favor after all this drama went down. Even if HYBE had offered her like, yeah, you can be CEO forever, legally it doesn't stand. That it's essentially a gentleman's agreement that was written down on paper, but if you wanted to challenge that, it wouldn't be valid. Why? Because the board of directors has the final say. And who's the board of directors? They are representing the owners. So the owners of ADOR, even though Min Hee-jin was trying to make it look like I am ADOR, ADOR is me, therefore I own it, it's not the case at all. Other people own ADOR and other people, HYBE, owned a lot more of ADOR. So under standard corporate law or in general, you know, like the owner of something has the final say. And so if the owner doesn't want Min Hee-jin as the CEO anymore, you can't have some gentleman's agreement contract override the decision-making power of the owners, which was the board of directors. Remember, the board of directors was essentially this tiny group that she and her minions were part of, and essentially they were just deciding everything as the quote-unquote owners, and there was like one representative from HYBE, and then when HYBE was just like, oh no, you ain't run this business, you are not going around this merry-go-round another time, and so they restructured the board where essentially HYBE would be able to overpower and, not let the funny business continue. And so the board, and this is all legal, the board of directors, and it makes more sense because HYBE owns like 80% of ADOR, that they would have more representation. So then they voted her out of the CEO position, but kept her as the producer. Why? Because as the ADOR board of directors, they have to protect the company interests of ADOR. And at that time, it looked like in order to protect ADOR, we need to protect NewJeans. And in order to protect NewJeans, we definitely should have NewJeans Mama stay on as the producer and stay on until the end of their contract. It's just that, girl, it just looked like you've been running too many games at that ticket booth when you were a CEO, so we can't have you there anymore. And let's follow HYBE, who's trying to get back to the meat and potatoes of this case instead of NewJeans trying to get you looking at that dessert cart that ain't ever gonna come to your table. HYBE said that they already identified evidence and released evidence of NewJeans' breach of duty back in March and confirmed it through these emails and messenger contents during an audit in April. Now, I'm talking about March and April last year in 2024. So remember, NewJeans was trying to fudge the timeline yet again, fudge time, saying that, oh my God, this audit in March and April was due to my raising a voice against plagiarism going on at HYBE and how ILLIT was threatening NewJeans. ILLIT was copying NewJeans and they were auditing me in retaliation for raising my hand and saying like somebody's copying me. No. Because those allegations raised by NewJeans happened after the audit got underway, after all of this evidence came to light, and it looked like HYBE was acting upon the evidence of you're trying to steal a label and a Kpop group. Not that you were complaining about ribbons in somebody's hair or, whether they went to the same hair salon as your NewJeans girls. And this was sort of sneaky. NewJeans' right-hand man apparently met with some investors, but before his first day of work. And so essentially in that way, you can kind of say like, no, I never met with investors, as a person working at ADOR, but he met with investors, okay? And then setting it up, saying that, all right, we're going to make sure we work really hard, maximize the operational profits for a few years, and then force HYBE to agree to fulfill that shareholder agreement, so buy my shares. So essentially HYBE is going to be paying a high price for NewJeans shares. So not only did NewJeans really get the infrastructure of HYBE, Source Music, to start her label and to start her artists and to get the power of HYBE behind them and then sign all of these advertising contracts and do all the marketing that creates a bigger scale group, bigger performances, essentially get bigger money, then be paid a bunch of money from HYBE to sell her shares, and then be in a position where she has, a good chunk of cash to then recycle it into an attack against HYBE. And then her plan, like she said, to leave ADOR an empty shell, just decimate the value of ADOR, then buy back her shares and then some at a cheaper price, and then totally run away. So HYBE just dropped a lot of receipts saying that, okay, Project 1945 will give you some more specifics about that. It includes issues such as unfair shareholders agreements, which is a breach of duty by the CEO, creating all these civil lawsuits against contracting parties, public relation campaigns meant to smear HYBE, delaying LE SSERAFIM, interfering with debut promotions. And so the directors of ADOR, HYBE said, made a decision that was beneficial to the company after sufficient discussion, and the directors really did act in the best interest of ADOR to, again, keep her as the producers, to keep NewJeans good. And HYBE said that, yes, they wanted to keep NewJeans on as the main producer of NewJeans. Keep her salary, keep all of her company perks as if, she was CEO, but she just wouldn't be CEO because she obviously demonstrated that she could not be trusted in that position. And HYBE said, look, just leaking her contract is enough to cancel the shareholders agreement. So NewJeans Mama's big hungry mouth cost her like hundreds of millions of dollars. That could have been the potential maximum like cash out of her stock options if she had just worked hard and not tried to steal. And in court, HYBE's legal representative said that Hee-jin's side had leaked the original shareholders contract to a prominent economic media outlet, and the shareholders agreement contains confidentiality clauses prohibiting public disclosure to the media and the general public without prior consultation to the other party. So such a breach will constitute a reason for terminating the shareholder agreement. So if you just look at that one little box of you gave your contract without telling us to the media, therefore that violates the confidentiality agreement and therefore nulls and voids the shareholder agreement. Just, be happy with your 13.5% and wait for some, the first idiot to come along that would want to buy it. And, some bunny uncle out there may have 13.5 carats to give you. But HYBE didn't stop there. It continued to press along the sexual harassment investigation that Hee-jin seemed to have rigged, and not only that, used as an inspiration for her to come up with a policy that would punish and go after whistleblowers. So who is the one that did not make ADOR safe, made it a very unsafe environment? So when HYBE brought all of these receipts, they mentioned that they found this KakaoTalk message from Hee-jin saying that, we need to establish a penalty clause for people who make all these false, quote unquote, false reports. So essentially what she's trying to say is that, look, we need to be able to label any other accusation that comes our way as fake. And if you do that, there's a penalty, and therefore that shuts everybody up, that keeps everybody in power. And what kind of situation do you have when you have that sort of abuse of power and carte blanche? Then abusers are going to feel like they can just do anything and create a very, very unsafe environment. And here she goes, going around as if she's a champion for women and being like some Gloria Steinem of the 16th floor over at the HYBE building. And she is not only trying to set up a policy that would stifle whistleblowers and scare them, she also sabotaged this investigation that she herself was supposed to lead. And she herself said that she did such a great job at investigating. The right-hand man was the one that was being accused of harassment by one of her employees. Not only did she share details of the investigation that she was in charge of, she was helping him craft his arguments and his reports. And she also went to the media to intimidate the victim, saying that this is ADOR's stance, but HYBE is saying, no. She was talking about her personal stance as if it were ADOR's stance, and that therefore constitutes abuse of power. And because she was abusing her power, they had to replace her as CEO, among the laundry list of all the other things. Now, HYBE also brought some receipts saying that, NewJeans Mama knew that this whole ILLIT plagiarism thing wasn't really like a big deal. She was not fighting for artistic justice or protecting her NewJeans members. She knew that she was just going to use it as a weapon, like a weapon that might be good enough to create trouble and to create the springboard for further attacks that would probably be more of the knockout punch. She, from the beginning, knew that this plagiarism issue was not really like a big issue or something that she could even win, but it would be enough to be able to get her at a very advantageous stance while she was fighting HYBE and creating all sorts of ruckus. It's really amazing that people actually took this seriously at the time, that they were really, thinking like, oh, well, she has a point, HYBE has a point, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I hate when people say that, like as if it's equidistant, that somebody's lie and your truth, that the actual truth is in the middle. No, when you lie, the truth is closer to the one that's not lying. So, that middle, shorten that middle. It's over here, okay? It's not over here. But people are just saying like, well, there might be some validity there. We have to wait for all this stuff. While you're waiting, she's like running laps around you. And while she's running laps, she's creating all of these other confusing arguments that somewhat have like maybe a rational point of contention, but as more time passes, you realize that doesn't make sense. So she kept saying like, remember, well, I only have 13.5%, and then my executives, they have, about 5%-ish. So, let's round up. Let's say like, even if we only had 20%, how can somebody with 20% take over the entire company? She kept repeating this over and over and over again. And HYBE wanted to put a stop to that argument because it looked like she was probably gonna bring it up again. Now, first of all, we were saying that like if you are courting investors, you're gonna be able to bring in capital that then now you combine your 20% with somebody who's like investing maybe 31%, and you get 51% control of the company. So a 20%er, yeah, can definitely finagle a way where they can take over a company. But not only that, HYBE said that there is a huge betrayal of trust because in the entertainment industry, intellectual property is everything. And if you seize control over the intellectual property, essentially if you have the NewJeans members eating out of the palm of your hand, you're controlling, for the most part, the intellectual property, and you can seize control regardless of the shareholding percentages, because where does money follow? Power. If she has the power over the girls and the music video director and the composers, she has basically the main nodes of the intellectual property. Therefore, she has the power, and that's where capital will follow, investors will follow, enough to then shove HYBE out of the picture. Now, this is what I call the spoiled princess argument. I can't even believe that Hee-jin is still trying to use this sort of situation. She's saying that HYBE's multi-label system has these inherent limitations because of the presence of multiple competitors within the same industry. Honey, she just needs to take a factory tour around Procter & Gamble. Like, they have like all of the competing laundry detergents, and that's what actually gives them a little bit more market power. But she's saying like, oh, well, this is horrible because, when my little NewJeans girls are trying to compete, and, ILLIT's coming out on TV while we're trying to do a concert the same week. That's unfair. And it's just like, are you nuts? And she's saying like, well, we had no plans for privatizing ADOR. I was just trying to protect NewJeans against all of the other competitors in the building. Now, not for nothing, this makes absolutely no sense, because do you actually think the world-class advertisers that latched on to NewJeans so quickly were really negotiating with just NewJeans and just you and just ADOR? Or were they negotiating with the power of HYBE? You mess up with one, you're going to lose them all. So HYBE has a lot of leverage, or you have a lot more leverage because you're part of HYBE, and you're getting it into your head that it's because of you. And so you're thinking like, well, I could just do this outside and I don't have to give HYBE a cut. I want to take it all. Whereas you don't realize how much of that fast open door, getting to yes in all the contracts had a lot to do with your being part of HYBE. And here she is thinking that she can get some bunny uncles to piece together her own raft of independence and row her way over to, like, you know, Gucci and McDonald's and whoever else that she thinks that, you know, she's going to do big advertising contracts with because she's so great. But no, the cooperative system, the big ship right now, at least with HYBE, it looks like it really does benefit a lot of the artists within that group. Who knows what the future holds, whether, this system is going to evolve and grow well, or it will, grow dysfunction. But definitely, at least they were trying to cut out this real big dysfunction that could sink the whole ship. And it seemed like her actions, because she seems like it's so, like, rational for her to operate in the world like this. It looks like she had grown up in a very low trust, hostile, deceitful environment. She was able to JIT her way to survive and actually thrive in some instances, because she's seeing her behavior reinforced and her values reinforced by seeing people succumb to it and go along with it. And we saw very bluntly at the National Assembly of Korea how many politicians were willing to go along with it. And literally, you get to see how people then do lower themselves to the lowest common denominator, especially if you're, like, in this kind of pretty baby environment. And there is a reason why that inspiration was on her wall. And I think that's the sort of world she's coming from, but it just doesn't work unless you're able to leech off of a healthy host. And a healthy host that doesn't know that you're there, but a healthy host that knows you're there, going to deworm and deparasite you. And so I think that's what is going on in the HYBE institution. And they just don't want that anymore. They just want to have it flushed out of the system. And more power to them, because this is going to be, hopefully, a really good and clear signal to people who want to just continue to operate based on deception to give it a break, okay? Just find a show on Netflix, find a box of Pepero, and just suck the chocolate off them sticks. All right, guys, what do you think? Do you think the prospects are looking good for HYBE? Share your comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.